Clara nunca se esquecera do momento em que encontrara o guerreiro Apache quase sepultado pela terra. Um resgate que mudaria não apenas seus destinos, mas também a história que os uniria em silêncio. Naquele instante, a floresta sussurrava ameaças ocultas, e seu coração batia firme, decidido a desafiar o perigo para salvar uma vida que ninguém mais ousava tocar. A floresta era um labirinto denso e silencioso, onde a luz de sol hesitava em penetrar entre as árvores tortas e enlaçadas. O ar carregava um cheiro de terra úmida e folhas secas, enquanto o vento impiedoso carregava consigo o presságio de tempestades que ainda não haviam chegado. O som distante de galhos quebrando indicava que aquela região reservava perigos invisíveis, onde a sobrevivência exigia mais do que coragem, pedia sabedoria e cautela. Em meio a essa vastidão inóspita, Clara avançava com passos firmes. Ela buscava ervas medicinais, aqueles milagres da natureza que dariam alívio para as cicatrizes que a vida lhe deixara. Havia nos olhos dela uma determinação silenciosa, uma força teimosa que teimava em encontrar um recomeço, depois de perdas dolorosas que haviam consumido seu sossego e sua esperança. A floresta, para Clara, não era apenas um lugar, era seu último refúgio, onde tentava costurar as feridas do passado. Sua atenção foi abruptamente capturada por um relevo estranho na terra, uma cova rasa, mal coberta por um amontoado de galhos e folhas. Aproximando-se, Clara sentiu o ar pesar com uma tensão antiga e profunda. Debaixo daquela fina camada de terra, os olhos semicerrados de Nantan, um chief Apache, imploravam por ajuda, entre suspiros doloridos. Seu corpo estava ferido, marcado por garras da natureza e mãos inimigas, prestes a ser engolido pelo solo. A compaixão de Clara não hesitou. Com cuidado, ela começou a remover os galhos e a terra que sufocavam Nantan, enfrentando o peso e a resistência da terra molhada, alheia às sombras que os espreitavam. A ameaça não vinha só da natureza, mas do olhar desconfiado e das mãos trêmulas do guerreiro, que recuava em meio à dor e ao medo. A fronteira entre salvar e ser salva oscilava num fio tênue naquele momento. Nantan recusava-se a confiar, sua alma marcada pela desconfiança que a história impusera entre os homens brancos e seu povo. Ainda assim, a força tranquila de Clara, sua coragem árdua e sua calma determinada criaram um espaço onde o silêncio se misturava com um acordo tácito. Ele aceitou a ajuda, não por escolha, mas porque a vida insistia em vencer, mesmo quando tudo apontava para o oposto. Enquanto ela o amparava, as duas presenças isoladas eram invadidas por sons vindos da floresta, passos firmes, vozes carregadas de ameaça. Rastreadores que avançavam em busca daqueles que deveriam permanecer escondidos. O perigo se anunciava, e a declaração silenciosa daquele encontro se tornou uma espada de dois gumes, entre salvação e condenação. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino ou algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso. Antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça, dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando, para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. Clara guided Nanpan through the thick underbrush, her steady hands supporting his weakening frame as they approached the long-abandoned cabin deep within the forest. The wooden structure was barely visible beneath the tangled vines and moss, a relic swallowed by time. Its sagging roof creaked softly with the breeze, promising a fragile shelter, but offering some refuge from the relentless menace pressing in around them. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of damp wood and forgotten memories. Clara moved swiftly to clear a spot near the small fireplace, where a faint, cold ash lay. She settled Nantan gently onto the creaking floorboards, her eyes scanning his face, hungered for signs of trust, but met only with shadows of suspicion. Nantan's eyes, dark and guarded, flickered with a flicker of something unspoken. The pain etched into his bruised skin was a language neither needed to translate aloud. His hands clenched tensely, the grip of old fears refusing to loosen. Clara's voice was soft, but firm, as she spoke. "This cabin will keep you. Safe for now. No one will find you here." But he said nothing, his gaze drifting toward the window, where tangled limbs of trees seemed to claw at the fading light. His silence was a wall, built stone by betrayal and battle. Clara remembered all too well the stories whispered among settlers. Stories that painted Apaches as enemies, threats without faces or reasons. Her hands moved deftly, removing torn fabric from his wounds. She was patient, her fingers careful as she cleaned the cuts with water drawn from her canteen, the coolness a whispered promise of healing. Nantan flinched at first, but gradually his body relaxed just enough to breathe. "Why did they hunt you so cruelly?" Clara asked, breaking the heavy quiet. Her voice was more question than accusation. The chief's gaze finally met hers, a flicker of pain dissolving the distance she had feared. "They fear what they do not understand," he said, his voice a low rumble, gravelly with exhaustion and sorrow. "My people, a shadow of what once were. They believe we steal their land, their lives. But we only seek to live as our ancestors did." Clara nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. The forest outside shuddered with a sudden gust, leaves rustling like whispered warnings. She glanced toward the cabin's single door, pressing her back against its rough surface. "We must be vigilant. The men searching for you won't rest." Nantan's eyes narrowed. "They come with hate in their hearts. To find me is less important than to send a message to all who would shelter us." His voice hardened with survivor's fatigue. She saw in him a man battered, not just in body, but in spirit. Yet beneath this hardened surface flickered something else. A flicker of hope, fragile yet real. It was why she had risked so much to save him, and why now, beneath the waning light, they were bound by more than circumstance. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of a small fire Clara lit, offering warmth against the cold creeping through the broken windows. She watched as Nantan's breathing slowed, momentarily unguarded, a glimpse behind the mask. Suddenly, sharp snaps echoed faintly through the trees, dry branches breaking under heavy boots. Clara's heart stuttered. She motioned silently for Nantan to stay low. Shadows flitted outside, masked shapes moving with predatory patience. "I heard them," she whispered, voice barely audible. Nantan's eyes hardened in response. Rats closing in on their prey. Clara edged closer, stealing any weapon she could find in the cabin's neglected corners. An old hunting knife, a broken chair leg grasped like a spear. She met Nantan's gaze. Their division of language narrowed to a shared resolve. In this moment, their fragile alliance transformed into a pact forged by the immediacy of threat. Outside, voices lifted in low but urgent tones, carrying the weight of unyielding pursuit. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual chorus, replaced by ominous silence, punctuated only by the approaching footsteps. Nantan's fingers clenched, a subtle shift as he prepared to stand, but Clara placed a steady hand on his arm. "Not yet," she urged. "We stay hidden." Minutes stretched, and the cabin walls felt as though they could tumble under the pressure of the hunter's proximity. The wooden planks vibrated faintly with each footfall closer, a ritual of fear tightening its grip on both of them. Then, from the gloom beyond the cabin, a figure paused. The sharp glint of a rifle barrel caught the dying light, aimed but unmoved. A hunter assessing his prey. Clara's breath hitched, and she squeezed Nantan's shoulder in silent warning. He nodded, muscles coiled for sudden movement. Yet, instead of entering, the figure whistled softly, a signal, and the men retreated into the shadows, voices fading with promises of return. The reprieve was brief. Nantan's keen eyes scanned the cabin, seeing more than broken wood and fading light. He turned to Clara, voice solemn and heavy. "There are wolves in my own camp, men I once called kin, who now seek my death." Clara's heart sank. The enemy was no longer just the hunters outside. It was betrayal within the very circle meant to protect him. "But we cannot fight divided," she whispered, feeling the fragile threads of trust twist tighter between them. "If we stand together, maybe we find a way." Nantan's gaze lingered, a storm raging as he weighed her words. For the first time since she had found him buried beneath earth and darkness, he allowed a sliver of hope to touch the edges of his resolve. Outside, the forest held its breath, a quiet before the storm. And then, a sudden rustle deeper in the woods. Not footsteps, but something else. Eyes widened. Clara and Nantan exchanged a glance, sharp as arrows. The danger was no longer just the men hunting them. Something else, more immediate and closer, was closing in. The cabin's thin walls barely held back the creeping shadow. The tracking hunters were almost upon them. Night had swallowed the forest whole, leaving only whispers of shadows twisting between the skeletal trunks. Inside the fragile cabin, Clara's breath hung heavy in the cold, mingling with the faint glow of the dying fire. The hunters outside had retreated, but the chill in the air whispered that their reprieve was merely a pause in an unyielding chase. Nantan's eyes scanned the dim room, sharp as an arrow, every muscle taut beneath his worn skin. The weight of his confession pressed down on Clara's chest, like the thick timber overhead. "There are wolves in my own camp," he murmured, voice hoarse, but edged with grim menace. Men I once called kin now seek my death. Clara's fingers tightened around the rough fabric of her shawl. The forest no longer seemed a refuge, but a cage closing in from all sides. Her gaze met his, an unspoken understanding, passing between them. The enemy was no longer a distant threat stalking through the branches, but a poison spreading from within. "I never imagined betrayal so close," Clara said softly, her voice trembling with the raw edge of fear and resolve. "But if they divide you, they'll destroy everything you fought for." Nanton's face shadowed with memories of ancient wounds. Our people, once united beneath one purpose, now fracture like dry wood under pressure. The pact broken, the secrets betrayed. It is this that has turned brother against brother. The fading fire cast flickering patterns on the walls, as if the spirits themselves danced in agonized unrest. Clara's mind raced. How had the sins of the past carved such deep scars that could still throb and bleed in this relentless present? And yet, beneath her rising panic, a fragile thread of hope intertwined. "We must stand together," Clara insisted, stepping closer, her voice low but unwavering. "If you face this alone, no one will survive." Nantan met her determination with a slow, wary nod. "For survival, unity is our last refuge." Suddenly, a rustle shattered the fragile quiet, like a sharp blade slicing silk. Clara's heart skipped, a movement from deeper within the woods. No heavier footfalls, but something swifter, too calculated to be mere animals. Nantan's gaze sharpened, nostrils flaring, as if sniffing the air itself. Not men, something else. Clara's breath caught. The forest had shifted. The very shadows seemed to lean closer with intent. Time narrowed, seconds stretching into a taut thread pulled tight. "I don't like this," she whispered, every instinct screaming danger. Nantan's hand brushed the small knife he had hidden beneath his worn clothing. "We no longer merely hide from the hunters. They are close. But this stalking shadow has different teeth." Outside, the wind sighed mournfully, shaking the brittle leaves until they clattered like bones. The darkness pressed against the thin walls of their shelter, cold and relentless. Minutes ticked by with unbearable tension, the silence punctuated only by the sharp crack of twigs snapping beyond the clearing. Clara's eyes darted to the cabin's broken window panes, gaps that felt suddenly vulnerable. The weight of their shared fate settled deeper in the room. Nantan's voice cut through the silence, low and grave. "The wolves at camp are just the start. This shadow comes from the fears you carry, secrets buried deeper than the earth." Clara swallowed hard, sensing the truth buried in his words. The enemy they faced was no mere man with rifle and hate, but the long, festering wounds of betrayal, suspicion, and broken promises. Yet, in this fragile union of desperation, something between them flickered, more than survival. A hard-earned truth linking two souls from worlds so far apart, pressed now into one fight. A sudden snap echoed closer, then a deliberate crunch of footsteps in the underbrush. Clara crouched beside Nantan, whispering, "They're almost upon us." His eyes flared with fierce resolve. "Prepare yourself. Tonight." We fight not only for life, but for the fragile hope of what can still be. From beyond the cabin walls, the shadows' edges began to writhe as unseen figures drew nearer, closing the circle with merciless patience. And then, the chilling whisper of a voice rose through the dark, almost human, but laced with something colder. The hunters no longer hunted alone. The forest held its breath, poised at the edge of violence. In the suffocating blackness, Clara and Nantan braced for the storm, whose fury would change everything. A secret had been spoken, a fate now twisted beyond escape. The next chapter waited in the silence, the confession that would reshape their world. The fire's faint glow flickered against the rough wooden walls of the cabin, barely holding back the encroaching shadows outside. Clara watched Nantan closely. His eyes, once sharp and unyielding, were now veiled with the burden of a secret long buried beneath the weight of generations. His voice, when it came, was low and heavy, as if dredging up a ghost he had fought to silence for decades. Decades ago, Nantan began, our ancestors made a solemn pact with the settlers, an accord meant to bring peace between our people and theirs. It was fragile then, fragile like the thin ice over a river in early spring. But the lineage of that promise unraveled, torn by greed, fear, and broken words. Clara's fingers tightened around the cup of lukewarm tea. She held, the warmth failing to reach her chilled heart. She leaned forward, folding herself into the cramped space near the fire, desperate for understanding. They offered land, safe havens for our tribes, in exchange for peace, for shared respect. But as time passed, those promises were forgotten. Colonists pushed farther into the land, taking what was never theirs to claim. Old rivals within our tribe seized on that betrayal, fracturing what little unity remained. The calm was shattered by fires, by blood spilled, not only by outsiders, but by brothers turning against brothers. Nantan's eyes glazed with sorrow, reflecting the flames that danced between them. Clara saw the thread of his pain, tied tightly to his role as chief. The weight of leadership compounded by betrayal's sting. I carry their shame, he whispered. It is why I am hunted, why my enemies strike not just at my people, but at me. The cabin seemed to shrink under the gravity of his confession, the walls pressing inward as if absorbing the depths of sorrow that filled the room. Clara swallowed hard. Her chest tightened as the narrative unfolded. A history she never truly knew. A truth that unraveled the prejudices carved into her soul. I thought I understood. But this is beyond simple hatred between our peoples. It's a wound that goes back generations, festering beneath the surface. Nantan nodded slowly. And that wound is bleeding still, fed by those who would see us destroyed rather than healed. Her gaze found his, steady and resolute, despite the shadow in his eyes. Then we must find a way to restore the honor stolen from your tribe. It is not just your fight. Her voice softened, a new resolve threading through her words. There are those among the settlers who remember the old ways, who hunger for justice. A fragile hope grew between them, a shared purpose threading through the silence that followed. The fire crackled, singing a haunting tune of past sorrows and present dangers. Suddenly, the cabin door creaked open with a soft groan, and a figure stepped inside. A messenger, worn and tense. His face was drawn, eyes darting with urgency as he spoke in hurried whispers. "There's a force moving fast through the valley," the man said, voice harsh with warning. "Led by Choctaw Bill, a cruel rival chief who envies Nantan's place and thirsts for blood. His men burn villages, leave death in their wake. If you stay, you'll face more than hunters. You'll face a war you cannot win alone." Clara's breath caught, the news slicing through the fragile calm like a jagged knife. She glanced at Nantan, whose eyes flared with a fierce light. Equal parts anger, fear, and determination. "This changes everything," Nantan said, standing with a strength that seemed to pulse beneath his skin. "We cannot only hide. We must act. The survival of my people, and what remains of honor, depends on rallying those still willing to stand with us." Clara found herself nodding, the weight of what lay ahead settling across her shoulders. Their fragile alliance had been forged in desperation. Now it would be tested by the storms gathering beyond the edge of their world. Outside, the forest whispered of coming conflict, its ancient trees the sole witnesses to a fate rewritten by broken promises and newfound courage. The message from the enemy was clear. A greater threat moved with cruel intent, and delay was no longer an option. Nantan's gaze lingered on the darkening woods beyond the cabin, eyes narrowed to steel. "We will find allies, both Apache and settler. The past may be fractured, but together, perhaps the future can be mended." Clara's thoughts raced, grappling with the enormity of that hope. The road ahead promised peril and heartbreak, yet beneath the uncertainty, a fragile trust now glimmered like embers ready to spark a blaze. The night deepened. Somewhere beyond the trees, drums beat, a savage heartbeat echoing through the shadows. The time for hiding was slipping away. And then, as if the forest itself held its breath, the cabin's fragile stillness shattered once more. A scout's hurried footsteps drawing closer, bringing with them the relentless herald of war. The fate of two worlds balanced perilously on the edge of what was yet to come. Clara tightened her grip on Taina's calloused hand as they stepped cautiously into the clearing. The late afternoon sun filtered through the thick canopy, casting dappled shadows that danced and flickered like restless spirits among the trees. Each breath Clara took was heavy with the scent of pine and ash, a lingering echo of recent fires that scorched more than just the earth. Around them, the forest murmured warnings, whispered on the wind. Danger was near, the fragile peace hanging by a thread. For days, Clara and Nantan had traveled the rugged paths between scattered Apache factions and isolated settler homesteads, pressing toward an impossible goal: unity amidst division. Every approach met with wary eyes and clenched jaws. Walls, invisible but impenetrable, rose from long-held fears and bitterness. The old wounds of broken promises and betrayals ran deep, carving canyons no words alone could fill. And yet, here in this shadowed glen, they had found a spark. Taina, Nantan's younger, sister and fierce leader of a resistant faction, had agreed to meet them. Her sharp gaze bore both challenge and cautious hope. When she stepped forward from the tree line, her hand resting on the carved handle of her hatchet, Clara saw the strength that mirrored Nanton's own resolve. Taina's presence was a sign that the rifts within the tribe might yet be bridged. "I never thought it would come to this," Taina began, voice low but steady. "To seek strangers among settlers, to ask for help from those who once meant us harm." Clara swallowed her own guilt for a moment, the weight of history pressing against her chest. "Past sins do not have to dictate the future," she said softly. "But time is slipping through our fingers. Your people's survival depends on choosing who to trust now." Nanton stepped closer. His eyes, dark and weary, held the quiet authority that had earned him both followers and enemies. "We cannot rebuild the tribe on shattered bones if we ignore the wounds between us," he said. "We face two enemies, those who hunt us from the outside, and those who would see us fall from within." The three exchanged a glance, no words needed to acknowledge the precariousness of their mission. Their footsteps were light but determined as they crossed into the clearing where a small band of settlers waited. Weathered men and women, hardened by frontier hardships and shadowed by their own fears, eyed the Apache leaders with suspicion balanced by fragile curiosity. Clara's presence was a bridge, her steady calm and understanding a balm amidst decades of mistrust. "We can offer shelter," one settler spoke cautiously, "and some arms. But our own hands are tied by the law, and by fear of retribution from the men who claim the land is theirs." Taina's eyes narrowed, but softened just enough to reveal the toll the years had taken on her spirit. "We ask not only for weapons," she said, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken loss, "but for allies who remember what justice means, who desire the peace that's been stolen from us all." Whispers rose among the settlers, hope tangled with hesitation. Clara stepped forward to address both sides, her voice steady. "We all have scars, but if we stand divided, we will only watch everything burn around us. There is no future in old grudges." Hours turned into night, and a tentative plan took shape beneath the pale light of the stars. Messages would be sent to neighboring tribes. Communication with sympathetic settlers would be strengthened. But throughout the discussions, a shroud of urgency drifted cloud-like over them, a heavy reminder that mercy was scarce in this land. Nanton's gaze drifted beyond the campfire, eyes catching a flicker of movement in the dark tree line. The forest seemed to close in, the cracking of distant branches carrying the ominous pulse of encroaching danger. The scent of smoke, thick, acrid, danced on the cold breeze. "The enemy comes faster than we feared," Nantan murmured. "Last night, a village to the east was burned to ash. Survivors fled into the woods with nothing but desperation." Taina's jaw clenched in silent fury. The time for negotiation is slipping away. Clara felt a knot tighten in her gut. Every moment spent weaving fragile alliances was a borrowed one, stolen from a tide of violence that threatened to drown them all. But relinquishing hope meant surrendering to the darkness. "We must prepare," Clara urged, voice low but resolute. "Our strength lies in what little unity we can forge now." A sudden crack. The snap of a twig under heavy boot sent a collective shudder through the circle of gathered faces. Eyes snapped to the shadows. Beyond, where the flicker of a torch illuminated smoke rising like a black banner against the night sky. Flames licked at the horizon, consuming the edges of a nearby settlement. The bitter scent of burning wood and salted earth invaded the cold air. "They're closer than ever," Taina whispered, her voice sharp as the blade at her side. "This is no longer a warning. It is a declaration." Nantan rose slowly, his stature commanding attention, despite the exhaustion etched deeply into his face. "Then the hour is upon us," he said, voice firm, yet carrying the weight of weariness. "We stand together, or we fall divided." Clara stepped back, watching the flickering firelight play across his determined features. The fragile alliance they had, led into being, now faced its greatest test. Hearts heavy with shame, hope, and the burden of survival beat loud in the silence that followed. Somewhere deep in the forest, the crackling of burning thatch mingled with distant cries, a brutal reminder that peace was fleeting. The night thickened, the enemy neared, and as the smoke spiraled into the cold sky, Clara understood with stark clarity. The next dawn would not bring reprieve, but war. The fragile threads holding their fragile peace were stretched taut to breaking. Tonight, the firestorms would either forge a new future or consume everything left unguarded. The forest held its breath as shadows gathered beyond the trees, and in that tense stillness, Clara, Nantan, and Taina braced themselves for the storm to come. Nantan led the small party through the twisted underbrush, his figure steady despite the weariness etched into his every step. Clara grasped Taina's hand tightly as they navigated the tangled wilderness, their breaths shallow in the crisp forest air, laden with pine and damp earth. Each rustle of leaves or snap of a twig tightened the knot of urgency in their chests. This was perilous territory. Every shadow seemed to watch, to wait. Their mission was clear, but fraught with danger: to seek out other Apache groups and reluctant settlers sympathetic to their cause, to forge alliances before the growing threat closed upon their lands like a noose. Taina's sharp eyes scanned the forest edges, alert for flickers of movement. Clara, bandaged arm throbbing from the wounds sustained days before, felt a deepening resolve that no ache could quell. Suddenly, a chorus of barked commands and heavy footsteps shattered the stillness. Hunters, close, too close. The air prickled with tension as a hail of arrows whistled toward them. Nantan swung low, deflecting a shaft with the haft of his spear. Taina dove behind a thick oak, drawing her hatchet in a swift, fluid motion. Clara stumbled, clutching her side, taste sharp with blood. The attackers pushed forward, disciplined and ruthless. Clara's vision blurred, the world condensed into the pounding of her heart and the crack of sticks under hurried feet. Through the haze, she glimpsed Nantan battling fiercely, his every move deliberate, shaped by years of survival against overwhelming odds. "We must hold," he growled, voice like gravel. "For the tribe, for the future." Despite pain, Clara fought to rise, gathering scrap courage to meet the danger head-on. Taina's voice sliced through the chaos, fierce and commanding, rallying their fragile band. Together, they pushed back, forcing the assailants to retreat temporarily into the dense forest. As the attackers melted among the trees, the forest reclaimed a precarious silence. Clara sank against a mossy root, breath ragged. Nantan knelt beside her, eyes burning with fierce protectiveness. "This is no random hunt," he said, voice low but fierce. "They seek to capture you and me, to crush what remains of my people." Clara nodded, swallowing her fear. The wound in her side pulsed, but a stronger ache lay beneath, the knowledge that mere strength would not suffice. "They come from many fronts," she murmured, "and from inside as well." Nantan's shadowed gaze darkened further. "A traitor walks among us, someone who twisted our own blood against me. Betrayal is deeper than arrows and guns." Taina's expression hardened. "Among those we called family, there are vipers, secrets that bleed poison into the heart of our fight." Clara's fingers clenched the rough bark beneath her. "Then we need more than force. We need trust, a new way forward, or we perish divided." Nantan's jaw tightened, the burden of leadership heavy on his broad shoulders. "This wound is old, decades deep. It began with our ancestors' broken pact, with settlers, an accord that promised peace but birthed slaughter instead. The betrayal fractured more than land. It shattered our very souls. Cold truth settled like ash between them." Clara saw beyond the myth and prejudice to a man laden with the pain of history's scars, carrying a shame not his own, but passed down like a curse. "I thought our feud was simple hatred," she whispered. "But it's a chain of broken promises, fear, and loss." Nantan's nod was slow, burdened with centuries of sorrow, a wound bleeding still, fueled by those who fear what unity might bring. The forest seemed to close tighter around their small group, leaves whispering secrets lost to time. Clara reached out, placing her hand over Nantan's. "We cannot rewrite the past, but we can forge a future. Among settlers, too, there are those who remember honor and justice." Taina's toughened features softened for a fleeting moment, hope flickering like fragile embers. "Then we must find those allies, no matter how few. The time grows short." Their words hung in the cool air as a soft footfall echoed through the clearing. A figure emerged, clothes dusted with travel's grime, eyes sharp with urgency. The messenger's breath came quick. "There's a force sweeping the valley," he said, voice edged with warning. "Led by Choctaw Bill. He envies your place, Nantan, and his cruelty knows no bounds. Villages burn, death trails his men. You cannot face this alone." Clara's breath caught, the weight of the message pressed on their weary hearts. Nantan's eyes flared with fierce fire. "We cannot hide. This war demands action, unity. We will gather those still brave enough to stand shoulder to shoulder." Taina clenched her fists, knuckles white, and reclaim what was stolen by fire and treachery. Clara felt the pulse of destiny thrum beneath the stars above. Their fragile hope now bore the heavy toll of harsh reality. The approaching storm was vast and merciless. As darkness deepened, Distant drums echoed, the ancient rhythm of battle, calling the lost and the brave alike. The path ahead promised no peace, only the hard grind of survival and the flickering chance of something more. Near the tree's edge, smoke rose against the night sky, crimson tongues, licking at the heavens, a furious warning, a declaration of all that was at stake. The forest held its breath. Their journey, their fate, balanced on the knife's edge of tomorrow. The land they called home teetered on the brink of invasion. The camp was a tempest barely held in check, simmering with tension that clawed at every flicker of peace left between the fragile alliances. Clara's eyes swept the assembled faces, men and women marked by hardship, shadows of suspicion clouding their gaze. Native and settler alike stood shoulder to shoulder under a tent of rusted canvas. But the cracks in their union threatened to splinter all they had built. Nantan's voice, deep and commanding, rose above the murmuring storm. "We gather not as enemies, but as those who share the burden of survival." His gaze locked on the wary eyes of colonial representatives, whose fingers twitched near holsters and hidden knives. The weight of history hung heavy in the stale air, and every breath seemed strained beneath the invisible weight of centuries-old mistrust. Clara stepped forward cautiously, her voice a delicate bridge over a chasm swollen with resentment. "The land offers us no favors. Our enemies do not discriminate. If we fracture here, the depths we fall will be beyond retrieval." Her words carried a trembling hope, the fragile thread of unity they had fought so hard to stitch. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some reluctant nods, others cold glances that pierced like arrows. Taina stood close by Nantan, her arms crossed, eyes fierce with the fire of resolve and lingering wounds. She spoke quietly, but firmly. "The future demands we choose trust over old hatred, yet fear will not be conjured away by mere words." The council became a crucible of raw emotion and veiled threats, voices rising and falling like the ceaseless wind through the trees. One settler, grizzled and battle-worn, spat bitterly. "How do we know this isn't a trick, that the bloodshed won't spill onto our doorsteps because of broken promises?" Nantan's eyes flashed with unyielding conviction. "Because it is no longer time for lies or silence. The truth I carry has been my burden for too long." His confession hung in the air, like a blade poised over fragile trust. Clara witnessed the slow thaw in some faces, hearts weighed down by the heavy toll of loss and the shared specter of annihilation. Yet others recoiled, shackled to fear and the ghosts of past betrayals. The rift they faced was not merely political. It was etched deeply into the marrow of every soul present. Suddenly, footsteps thundered on the beaten earth outside the council's fragile sanctuary. The tent flaps trembled as a shadow broke through the twilight, cutting the gathering silence like a jagged thunderclap. The rival chief's harsh voice sliced through the tension. "Nantan," he bellowed, eyes burning with cruel fire, "your cowardice ends tonight." Behind him, armed men crowded the clearing, their faces twisted by hatred and bitter malice. The council froze, shocked by the audacity of the intruder's challenge. His presence was a deliberate provocation, a gauntlet thrown down in the face of fragile hope. Nantan rose slowly, every muscle taut with simmering rage and restrained power. His voice rang with the authority of a man who bore not only his own burdens, but those of a fractured people. If you seek to destroy me, come and face me. But know this, the future I fight for will not be torn apart by bitter grudges and savage pride. Clara felt the cold steel of inevitability sharpen around them. Within a heartbeat, the camp was electrified, the fragile threads of diplomacy fraying at the edges, as two forces poised to ignite a fire that would scorch more than just the earth beneath their feet. The rival chief's sneer twisted like a poison in the gathering dusk. Then prepare, Apache. Tonight, your fate is sealed by the strength of my hand. Silence hung briefly like a held breath. Then, the forest seemed to lean in, watching, waiting, and as the cruel challenger's shadow blocked the waning light, the fragile council shattered into whispers and restless steps. The dawn would rise on a battlefield, and the night's calm would be remembered only as the breath before the storm. The tension in the clearing crackled like static electricity. Nantan's muscles coiled, every sinew taut as he squared his shoulders and prepared to face the rival who had brought the war to their doorstep. The bitter winds whispered through the trees, carrying the harsh words of the enemy chief, a challenge wrapped in malice and old grudges. Clara felt the weight of the moment press upon her chest as the rival chief stepped forward, eyes blazing with hatred. His voice cut through the murmur of the gathered crowd, demanding Nantan's disgrace. But the chief of the Apache, though wearied by battles both physical and spiritual, did not waver. His gaze locked with the rivals, a silent vow passing between them, a promise that this fight was about more than land or power. It was a battle for the soul of their people, for the fragile hope of healing fractured wounds. The camp, once unified under the fragile banner of survival, held its breath. Settlers and native alike stood frozen, the past's weight hanging heavy in the cold air. The quiet before the storm was a fragile thing, every eye watching, waiting to see who would break the silence first. Nantan's voice finally broke free, steady and resolute. If you seek to tear us apart with poison and pride, know this, I will stand as long as my breath does. For the future I fight for will not be lost to bitterness. The rival chief sneered, thirsting for a fight that promised only chaos and bloodshed. Tonight, your fate is sealed, he spat, brandishing a cruel smile like a weapon. Prepare yourself, Apache. Your time ends here. A gust of wind swept through the camp, carrying dry leaves and dust, as if nature itself braced for the coming violence. Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of her cloak, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. This confrontation was more than a battle. It was a crucible where past betrayals would either be set ablaze or forged into something new. Suddenly, tension shattered as the rival chief drew his weapon with a sharp metallic ring. Nantan's hand moved swiftly, but it was not just strength or skill that defined their clash. It was the fierce embodiment of survival and hope intertwined. The two men moved with a deadly grace, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Each strike a desperate plea for a future beyond hatred. Clara and Tana watched, breaths caught in their throats, as old wounds bled into the fight. Every blow landed spoke of generations of pain. Every parry a struggle against the ghosts that sought to claim them all. The camp around them faded into a blur. The war between two men became a war between old grudges and the flickering light of renewal. Suddenly, Clara stepped forward, her voice slicing through the chaos. "Enough," she cried, eyes blazing. "This path leads only to ruin for all of us. Stand down before more blood stains these lands." Her words hung heavy, raw with the truth that the rival chief's rage had obscured. For a moment, silence reclaimed the space as the wind carried her plea. Nantan's gaze briefly flicked toward Clara's outstretched hand, a bridge offered amidst the clashing blades. The rival chief spat at the ground, but the fire in Clara's voice unsettled even his cruel heart. "Do you see what your bloodlust brings? Families burned, futures stolen. If you fight, we will all lose." A long breath escaped from the rival chief, his eyes flickering with something unspoken, recognition of a truth too long denied. Slowly, he lowered his weapon, the tension draining from his frame, like smoke rising into the night. Nantan stepped back, weary but unbroken. The camp exhaled as one, the fragile peace returning like the first glimmer of dawn after a black, stormy night. Yet, beneath the surface, Clara and Nantan both felt the hard truth. This victory was but a momentary calm. The rival might be beaten, but the shadows that haunted their paths, the deeper threats, the silent poisons of betrayal and fear, still lurked, waiting. In the hush that followed, a chilling breeze wound its way through the trees, carrying an unspoken warning. Clara's eyes sharpened as she scanned the forest's edge. Something far more insidious than rival chiefs stirred in the darkness, a danger patiently watching, moving closer with unseen intent. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with foreboding, yet edged with steel. The rival has fallen, but a greater danger waits, one we cannot see yet. Nantan nodded, understanding the grave weight in her words. The war was no longer just between men wielding weapons, but a battle against fear, suspicion, and the secrets that could unravel them from within. The night grew colder, the shadows lengthening like claws, reaching out to claim all that remained. And so, beneath the ancient canopy, with the fallen rival chief behind them, and the unknown menace closing in, Clara and Nantan braced themselves. Their fight had changed, but the storm was far from over. The first light of dawn crept gently through the fractured canopy, spilling pale gold over the weary faces gathered within the newly rebuilt council circle. The fires that had once raged beyond the valley were now but smoldering embers, a reminder of them. Tempest they had endured, and the fragile peace they had won. Clara stood beside Nantan, their hands briefly touching, a silent testament to the bond forged through trials that no words could fully express. Today, we begin not just to rebuild what was broken, Nantan's voice carried steady across the circle, but to honor what was lost, and to promise that the mistakes of the past will not be repeated. Around them, settlers and Apache warriors alike shifted, eyes reflecting wariness softened by hope. The confession once sworn only between Clara and Nantan, the secret of their tribe's fractured pact, the betrayals that had nearly shattered them, now served as a foundation, a call for honesty and unity. It was no longer a burden to be carried alone, but a shared history to confront, learn from, and transcend. Clara's gaze swept across Tana, whose fierce spirit, now tempered by the cautious optimism of renewed purpose, met hers with a nod of approval. There had been bitter nights, sharp words, and hearts wounded by suspicion. But here they stood, united in a way few could have imagined when the fires first threatened to consume all. "Trust is not given lightly," Clara said softly, "and it must be earned day by day. But we have seen what division costs us, and we have seen what courage can change." Her voice, clear and calm, held the weight of someone who had walked through darkness and found light, not just outside, but within. Nantan leaned forward, his dark eyes steady and rooted in the wisdom of leadership tempered by humility. "The rival, Choctaw Bill, has been defeated, his cruelty ended. But the shadows that linger are old ghosts still. Our enemy is no longer just the men who came with weapons, but the fears, the secrets, and the wounds that live beneath the surface, waiting to divide us once more." A slight wind stirred the leaves overhead, whispering through the ancient trees in a language older than any of them. Clara felt the shift, a signaling of renewal not only in the land, but in their hearts. The very forest that had once sheltered them in hiding now witnessed the dawn of a new covenant. Tana stepped forward, her voice firm and proud. "Our tribe stands not in isolation, but in the strength of our alliances. We forged those bonds in fire and blood, and now we uphold them with honor." Her eyes gleamed with the fierce love of kinship tempered by the fierce wisdom of survival. "What remains now," Clara said, "is to carry this peace beyond these woods, into the settlements, into hearts once closed, to remind all who dwell here that coexistence is possible, not by forgetting our history, but by choosing a future together." Nantan nodded, a faint smile breaking the solemn lines of his face. "The confession that weighed on me is now the light we walk by. Our past was heavy with pain, but it can become a path forward, a legacy of courage, forgiveness, and hope for those who come after." Their voices joined in an unspoken vow, not just leaders of a battered tribe and a weathered settler woman, but partners in an unforeseen journey that transcended the scars of history. As the sun rose fully, spilling warmth across the valley and igniting the horizon in shades of fiery amber, Clara glanced toward the forest's edge. Born from sacrifice. Hand in hand, they turned toward the gathering, a community rebuilt, not just from ashes, but from understanding. The wounds that had once threatened to tear them apart had been spoken aloud, faced together, and in their sharing, they found the strength to forgive and to heal. The valley breathed a sigh beneath the heavens, its silence full of promise. Their fates no longer bound by fear or ancient grudges, but by a shared hope, a future where Apache and settler might walk side by side, and the forest, ever watchful, whispered blessings on the wind. A new dawn had broken, luminous and sure, carrying the legacy of Clara and Nantan's courage, a legacy that would endure through the quiet strength of peace.